Welcome to our radon training. It's called Precautionary Foundation Air Sealing Strategies for Radon, and it's focused on WPN 17 DOE WPN 17-7 and what we're required to do for radon in our weatherization projects. I'll be your presenter for this. My name is Chris Clay. I'm the Quality Assurance Manager and Lead Technical Trainer at the Building Performance Center. Your learning objectives for today are to describe radon characteristics, visually recognize the location of different radon potential zones of places you work in weatherization, describe the mechanism that moves radon into the house, list the sources of radon, list one major health risk from radon exposure, recognize the EPA Radon Action level, locate applicable weatherization rules regarding radon, and identify the precautionary measures. Hopefully that'll be all easy to do once we've been through these slides. So radon, known as Radon 222, is a radioactive gas. It's colorless, odorless, and tasteless. It comes from uranium decay. It's naturally occurring. It's found all over the world. And radon can decay and emit ionizing radiation. Therefore, it could be harmful to us. Radon is found all over the world. All over the country. You look at a map here, the red are the high radon zones and the yellow are the lesser zones. So what we need to know to function in weatherization is we need to know that zone 1 is the red zone and that the indoor average of these houses is greater than 4 picocuries per liter. We'll touch bases on that concept of picocuries per liter a little bit later. Zone 2, the indoor average is somewhere between 2 and 4 picocuries per liter. That's known as the orange zone. And Zone 3 is the yellow zone. And these counties have a predicted indoor average of less than 2. What the EPA says is, no matter what, all homes should be tested regardless of their zone designation to find out where they truly are on that scale. Okay. So this is a link in our PowerPoint presentation. You won't be able to take advantage of it, but just go to the epa.gov/radon/EPA map radon zones, and you can find a map of your state and the counties you work in. All right. As a weatherizer and an energy auditor calling out work in buildings, you need to be able to recognize what type of zone you're working in when you're doing your weatherization work, whether it's red, orange, or yellow. All right, they determine what we're gonna do. All right, whether we have to. Oops, sorry about that. They determine what we're gonna do, whether we have to do the precautionary measures or not. So, next subject is, how does the radon get in the house? Well, it's in the rocks and soils under our building. So hot air rises and leaves the building, and it brings radon into the building. So building science tells us how that does that. We have natural driving forces and mechanical driving forces. The natural driving forces are wind and temperature. So if the wind blows by the top of our house, it sucks on the attic. That means the attic sucks on the house, and the living space sucks on the crawl space. And if there's, if your crawl space is, over on the dirt, or concrete over the dirt, there's potential that we're pulling soil gas out of the soil when that wind goes over the top of your house, and some of that soil gas can be radon. So wind is a driving force that pulls radon into our house. We also have stack effect, which is the temperature difference between inside and outside. So During the winter months, when we're heating the house, hot air rises and leaves the top of the building shell and creates a negative pressure, which creates a negative pressure in the house, which sucks on the crawl space or basement, and that tends to pull soil gases up into the house. The other thing that can pull, those are the natural driving forces, but we got the mechanical driving forces that can create a negative pressure in the house and therefore pull radon up out of the soil. Those would include, exhaust fans. The exhaust fans make an area of low pressure, and that would tend to pull radon gas up out of the soil. Because of running an exhaust fan, it could be kitchen or bath fan. Duct leakage can create pressures in the building, negative pressures in the building, and so there's another thing that can create a negative pressure in the building that's stuck on the crawl space that pulls the soil gas up into the building. You could technically, if you have supply leaks in the crawl space, that's going to pressurize the crawl space, and it would tend to help drive radon gas up into the building, as well as return leaks, which would directly pull it into the building. Door closure, we're all familiar with that in our work. When we close the doors to some rooms, if we have a single return system in our house, if we close the bedroom door and there's only a supply behind that door, that area behind the door is going to be pressurized, and there's an equal and opposite reaction in the hallway where the return is, and the return's looking for that air, so it'll pull it across holes in the building envelope. The return is essentially making a low pressure area in the main body of the house, and therefore if you have any holes in the floor across the main body of the house, it'll tend to pull air up from the crawl space or the basement, and there could be radon gas in that soil. All right, so the other way radon gets up into the house is it evaporates, it mixes, radon gas is dissolved in your well water, and then when that well water is introduced into the house, say showering or bathing or washing dishes or doing laundry or running the dishwasher, the radon comes out of the well water, and now it's as a gas in the house, and you can breathe it in once it's there. So the two ways radon gets into your house is from the soil underneath your house, or underneath your, in the crawl space or the basement, cracks and crevices in the basement, over this, with this concrete over the soil, or it can come in through the well water. So it comes in from the soil under a house and from the well water. What are the health effects of radon? Well, radon is the second leading cause of lung cancer. Obviously, smoking's the first. The estimated death per year is about 21,000. Cigarette smoking is 480,000, so there's a lot more people die from cigarette smoking, but it definitely is the number one health effect from radon is lung cancer. All right, and this happens when radiation is released during the decay process, and the radon progeny emit alpha particles, some of which are radioactive, that attach to airborne dust, and then you inhale that dust. And if some of it's radioactive, then you have radioactivity in your lungs, which damages the lungs. All right. Now, we were talking earlier about picocuries per liter. A picocurie is a measure of the rate of decay, or rate of radioactive decay of the radon. When the radon decays, it emits ionizing radiation in the form of alpha particles. And so picocurie per liter is a measurement of the rate of radioactive decay of radon in a particular volume of air, a liter. All right, so EPA approved tests use picocuries per liter, and that's the most common measurement used around the country and around the world, but EPA approved tests also may use a different measurement called working level, and the World Health Organization uses becquerels per cubic meter. If and when we do testing on radon, you're going to get your results back in picocuries per liter probably 90% of the time, and then 10% of the time it might be working level. You can always you can change working level into picocuries per liter with a little math. All right, now radon action levels, when do we take action? All right, well, the EPA has decided that we must take, that they highly suggest that anytime you're over 4 picocuries per liter in the lowest living area of your house, you should be taking action. All right, and all action levels are intended to be, quote, your annual average of the level of radon in your house. So EPA is anything greater than 4 picocuries per liter, we must take action. You can see there's a working level there, and there's also the 100 becquerels per cubic meter. Essentially, the WHO level is about 2.7 picocuries per liter. That's a little less than, so they're a little more conservative than we are. The WHO is a little more conservative than EPA. I don't know if anyone really knows for sure, but it's definitely something we need to pay attention to. Now, radon testing, just so you know, generally the outdoor air and the average content of radon gas in the outdoor air is roughly 0.4 of a picocurie per liter, and the estimated indoor average for the whole United States is about 1.3 picocuries per liter. I've just gotten done doing some long-term testing on my living room with radon, and that's the lowest living space. I have a full basement under my house, and we're right now at about 1.3 picocuries per liter is where we're at. Just so happens to be the estimated indoor average. When you do radon testing, the longer the test, the more accurate the measurement, and it's pretty dynamic because we have, we've got stack effect, we've got an air handler in the basement that moves air around, we've got exhaust fans, we have weather. So the weather will affect the test, and how the house is operated during the test will affect the test. So the longer the test, the better off it is. But most assuredly, always follow the instructions for the test. All right. But generally, longer tests are better. So typically, this is how the EPA thinks, and this happens in real estate a lot, and in a lot of states. Washington State's not so radon focused, but we should be. It's just as prevalent here as in other parts of the country. But anyhow, what EPA says is always start with a short-term test, and these short-term tests are anywhere between 3 and 7 days, as long as you take the test. We'll place these tests in the lowest living area of the house. In my house, I tested the living room because that was the lowest living area. But I do have a full basement, but no one lives down there. All right. But if you did have someone living down there, then you would take the test down there. We don't necessarily want to have this particular type of short-term test in a high humidity zone because it uses activated charcoal, and that'll affect the test. The charcoal absorbs the radon, and later on you're going to send that test to the lab to get it checked out. And of course, the test can be affected by weather. Like I said, you could have the doors and windows open. It could be extra windy. There could be no wind at all. It could be raining. But anyhow, you know, it's a short-term test, so you're going to do the best you can. A lot of people say, yeah, it's nice to keep the doors closed, but it just depends when you're taking the test. So first thing you do is you start with the short-term test for 3 to 7 days, and you're going to end up having to send this back to the laboratory to get it checked out. All right. Now, there's another type of test. It's called the long-term test. This is anywhere between 8 and 365 days. You know, 90 days of testing is considered long-term, so the longer you do it, the better it is. These tests are again placed in the lowest living area where you live. Not like I said, I have a full basement, but we don't live down there, so we're not going to test down there. We're going to test in the living space. These type of tests are not affected by high humidity because they don't have any charcoal on them. They just have a piece of film, and when the radon hits the film, it actually etches into the film. And so when you send it back to the lab, they're going to look at those impacts or tracks of alpha particles, and from that they can tell you what your average level was for the time that you did the test. The longer test takes, you know, is better in taking into account changes in the weather, and of course you're going to have to send this back to the lab for a measurement. Just so you know, I spoke about having my living room tested or my house tested for radon, and that I used what they call a continuous measuring device. I think it's called an Air Things, and it just keeps measuring the radon. It's a little device. It's not like these, and it's meant to, it can do short and long-term tests. Excuse me. Okay, so again, I just wanted to get back to the fact that EPA always recommends that you do start with a short-term test. All right, now we're going to look at a couple flow charts about, you know, what do you do with the results of the test. All right, and so anytime you get a radon testing result, like you do a short-term test, which is is your first test, and you get less than 4 picocuries per liter, they say you're done. There's no action. But you should consider testing in the future because, you know, how accurate was your short-term test? You see what I'm saying there? How accurate was it? Did you have the doors and windows open? Was the air handler running? You know, you kind of want to do it in a sense in your worst case, but you know, a lot of times in real estate transactions, they just have to do it. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter what's going on at the house. You just take the test. All right. Now, let's look at another flow chart here. It says the first test results are greater than 4 picocuries per liter, but less than 10 picocuries per liter. All right, so anytime you're greater than 4 on your first test, which is the short-term test, you're allowed to, they want you to do another test. And you can do one of two tests. You can either do another short-term test and then average the 2 test results, or you can do a long-term test. All right, there you sort of dump the first test and you just deal with the results of the second test. So if you average the 2 tests, if you're doing a short-term test and you average the 2 tests, less than 4 picocuries per liter, they would suggest you test again. But if it's more than 4 picocuries per liter, then they recommend that you remediate the radon. With the longer test, it's the same thing. If you're less than 4, consider testing again. If you're more than 4, remediate. Now, what does remediate mean? It's to provide a remedy. What do you do to provide a remedy for high radon? Now, what we're talking about here is not something we're going to do in weatherization. We're not going to put a soil suction radon reduction system in a house. We're not allowed to. all right, through DOE weatherization. But what EPA is saying is that if you have radon over 4 picos per liter, they strongly suggest you should do something about it. And this is one of the examples, and it's called a soil suction reduction system. And essentially they come in all sorts of forms, but what it's built of is there's a fan. We exhaust that fan to outside, up off the roof, and the fan goes and it's basically sucking air from below the slab, below the slab, or it's sucking air from below the ground cover if you don't have a slab. So you can look these up on the internet. They're active systems and they use electricity, but they do a good job of depressurizing under the slab or depressurizing under the ground vapor barrier and removing the soil gas before it can get up into the house. So that's not something we're going to do in weatherization, but it happens every day in the radon industry. All right. Now we're going to look at the Radon Rules as DOE sees it, and we're focusing on weatherization program known as 17-7, the action and allowability. You can see our little link there that you can get at this. But what it says is mitigation is not allowed, and testing, but testing is allowed in areas with high radon potential. All right. And but it also says that in homes where radon may be present, the work scope should include precautionary measures based upon the EPA Healthy Indoor Environment Protocols for Home Energy Upgrades to reduce the possibility of making radon issues worse. All right. So we're not allowed to do mitigation, but we are required to do the precautionary measures in areas with high radon potential. So mitigation is not an allowable cost. All right, testing is an allowable cost. Not many people, I don't think anybody's really going to test in the DOE situation. What they're probably going to do is they're going to do their precautionary measures, and these precautionary measures are required in closed crawl spaces and in basements. So if you have a vented crawl space, it's not required. If you have a combination basement crawl space and that crawl space is closed up, you've got to do the precautionary measures. But if you have a vented crawl space that's attached to the basement, then you have a vented basement, so you're not required to do the precautionary measures. So again, one thing that WPN 17-7 definitely says is that we need to do client education for our people that we're working on their homes, and we are required to either give them this radon pamphlet with a signed confirmation, and most everyone is giving their clients many more pamphlets besides this one, but this is one that we're giving them during our audit. And we're also required to give them a list of the precautionary measures that we're going to install at their house. We may install different measures at different houses, and so we'd want to make a point of letting them know that these are the precautionary measures we installed in their home. WPN 17-7 requires training for our weatherization field staff. They describe that as auditors, assessors, and inspectors must have knowledge of radon, what it is and how it occurs, including what factors make it worse, and that the precautionary measures may be helpful. The one person they left out in the field staff is, we've got technicians too that should have knowledge about radon and actually how to install the precautionary measures. Now, most of our technical staff who are in the field installing, they know how to do air sealing, they know how to put ground covers down. That's essentially what we're doing for radon, doing precautionary measures, but they're a little bit more particular, and we might need to make those staff people, those installers, understand that that's what you're doing. You're doing this part is about radon, even though it's very similar to what you do in any weatherization house. All right, so one of the things we're also required to do in training field staff is how to do sealed ground covers. Workers must be trained in proper vapor retarder installation, but what they're really saying is a sealed ground cover. What do you mean a sealed ground cover? I'm talking about a ground cover that in a sense stops all soil gas from getting up into the building. So this is going to be taped and glued and sealed up and I know up in Alaska, I'm very familiar with what they do up there. They tend to do these sealed ground covers all the time. It's part of how they do their normal work. But where I work in Washington State, we're not sealing the ground cover. We're usually just laying it down, laying plastic down. There's a few gaps there. We don't seal the edges of it to the walls, and we don't seal the edges of where plastic overlaps. But when we say sealed, we mean sealed, and that's what we have to do for the precautionary measures. We also are required to train weatherization field staff. We're doing it today, right now. You're doing it. What about we need to train you about radon zone maps, how to find the zone that the county that you're working in. Understand, is it a zone that has higher, is it orange or red? And if it's orange or red, then you need to do the precautionary measures. So field staff need to be able to recognize whether the house is located in zone 1 or 2 or red or orange. All right, now the work scope must include, if you're writing up a work scope, it must include precautionary measures as listed in the EPA Healthy Indoor Environment for Home Energy Upgrades. All right, and this is a pretty good document, but unfortunately the way they wrote this WPN 17-7, they're referring to this document. You're going to have to find this document. And it tells you to cover exposed earthen floors in basements and crawl spaces according to section 1.2 of EPA's, another document that EPA has. It's called the EPA's Indoor Air Plus Construction Specifications. It tells us to air seal sump pumps, install airtight sump pump covers in such a way that water can drain from above and below the sump cover. They requires us to install airtight drain fittings or traps in the foundation, if you have a floor drain, and seal and caulk penetrations or openings or cracks in below grade walls and floors that contact the ground with a sealant that meets the requirements of ASTM C920. So in my house, I have a drain in the floor. It doesn't really go to any plumbing. It's just down into the earth. And I had to get a special drain for that. It's called what they call that thing? A vapor drain is what they call it. All right, so here, let's look at the list here. For the precautionary measure list is we're going to need to seal cracks and crevices in our foundation slabs or floor slabs if we have a basement. And if there's any crack in that slab, that's a potential pathway for soil gas to come up, so we would seal that with the ASTM C920 caulk. Any foundation walls that are below grade that have cracks in them, those need to be sealed, air sealed tight with ASTM C920 caulk to stop soil gas from coming through that crack. We need to install airtight drain fittings in the floors. Yes, like my drain in my floor goes to nowhere. It just goes down into the rocks under my house, and that needs an airtight drain fitting, and you have to, they're called radon drains, and you can look them up on the internet. Cost me $17 to get it sent to my house, $17 to buy the drain, but $29 to ship it there. So I don't know what that was all about, but I wanted that drain pretty well. Okay, then we always cover earthen floors with our ground cover. You know, we do that for moisture control, but when it comes to precautionary measures, we're doing it for soil gas control. All right, when we put these ground covers down, we're going to make them airtight. So you can see here in this picture, they've taped around anything that penetrates through that ground cover, and wherever there was a lap, they taped it. So if you want to read more about the precautionary measures or get in depth with the precautionary measures, you can go to the NREL National Renewable Energy Labs Standard Work Specifications 2020. They have a pretty good description of it. I found that there was a couple things we could add to it, or a couple things we could remind you of what you do, of how to do it better. You know, they didn't hit all the nails. You know, there's a couple nails still sitting up there, but you read it and see what you think about it. You know. But we're going over it here basically. So anyhow, so here's where a floor slab comes together with a stairway that goes up out of a basement, and there's a crack between the foundation wall and the stairs going up, and we need to seal that with an ASTM C910-20 rated sealant. All that is it's just a very flexible sealant. It's not very workable, but what we're trying to do is when the concrete moves around, this particular sealant has been rated to not tear apart or come loose, and it's what you need when you have a concrete. All right. Here's a picture of a below, in the foundation wall is a drain that goes through the wall here, and there's a gap around it. That's below grade, so soil gas can come out of that hole there. And we are going to use some of that rated sealant to caulk that gap and stop the any airflow that might be able to come through there. With sump pumps, they require us to install an airtight sump pump cover. You can go to PacificNorthwest.gov resource and guides, and they'll show you how to install an airtight sump pump cover that also lets water come through, which sounds challenging. They're actually using the top of this vent cover as the direct connection to the slab below, and they're actually sucking air. That's their main point, to suck air from below the slab, is this sump pump. So they've sealed it all up, and that vent is actually pulling air out of the soil, and it's also where the sump pump is, right below there. So challenging to get a sump pump to drain, to get water to come into the sump pump, you know. So you'll have to work that out when you get to that point. Now, this is the airtight drain fitting in a basement floor. This is the one I put in my house. So that's the drain that goes down into the rocks below my house. I'm thinking that's the major entry point for soil gas into my house. Anytime I depressurize the house, I was probably pulling soil gas out of this hole there. And so they send this little vapor drain to you, you connect it up, and then you put your drain cover back over the top, and essentially what it'll do is let water flow through but no gas come up. And it seems to be working, because as I've monitored the levels of radon in my house, they've gone down over time. My average in the house before I installed that drain was probably a little more than 4 picocuries per liter. All right, so now cover earthen floors that are within the pressure and thermal boundary. This is a very important description that you need to pay attention to, because you don't need to do these precautionary measures on every house. All right, it's only if the earthen floors are within the pressure and thermal boundary. So here, what you see here is a picture of a conditioned crawl space. They have insulation on the walls of the crawl space. they're in a sense heating the crawl space is the heated space. That's not necessarily the air in our house, but it is pretty much some of the air in our house. So as long as it's within the thermal boundary. So what does that mean? It means any kind of closed or closed crawl space is another way to refer to it. Another way to refer to it is an unvented crawl space. It could also be an unvented basement, or it could be a half basement, half crawl space that are unvented. So it says, whenever site conditions permit, cover exposed floors within the pressure and thermal boundaries with 6 mil or greater polyethylene sheeting, lapped at least 12 inches and sealed with appropriate sealant at all seams, walls, and penetrations. And it must also be run 6 inches up the wall and taped and sealed. All right, so we're going to cover the earthen floors with their 6 mil poly. We're going to poly the seams. Some people used acoustical sealant on the seams, which is an acceptable thing. The sealant is like very thick caulk that never dries out, and you push the two pieces of plastic together. It holds it pretty well. Another product people are using is what they call a seaming tape, or a construction seaming tape, that holds the plastic together. We want to make sure we get that poly nice and tight to the posts and to the footings. And so that's what you're looking at here. On the left, they're taping it to the concrete, which may not be the best. On the right, they've taken the acoustical sealant, they've put it on the little footing, and then they've power nailed some foam board against the plastic and the foundation to make a seal against the concrete. They're making it airtight. Again, we need to run that poly up the wall. A lot of times when there's foam board on the wall, they'll put the poly up first and then put the foam board over it. And you can see on the left is acoustical sealant and poly just sticking it to the concrete. On the right, they've mechanically fastened. They've used a piece of foam board, and then they power nail through the foam board and get the foam board to mechanically fasten the plastic to the wall. The one on the left could fall off. It just depends on how much activity there is. So, and then there's, you've got to seal this poly to anything, that comes through the poly. Here a ladder is sitting on top of it, so they sealed around the legs of the ladder. All right, here they sealed around a pipe. All right, other precautionary measures you need to pay attention to is duct systems are great at moving air from the crawl space or basement up into the house. So often in closed crawl spaces and unvented crawl spaces and conditioned crawl spaces, we tend not to seal the ducts. But when you think about it, the holes in the ducts are pathways up into the building. So if you want to stop soil gas, in a redundant fashion, first you seal the poly, and then you seal the ducts and seal the holes in the floor, and you're going to probably do a pretty good job of keeping soil gases from getting up into the house. This is our normal work, sealing ducts, right? But if you have a return air duct down in the basement in a closed crawl space, closed basement, you're going to want to make sure that return's sealed up really well, because it's a very high point of pressure, of pressure there if you have leaks close to the air handler. Also, if you have a filter slot down in the basement, you're going to want to seal that up with some duct tape. You want to get, you've sealed the duct with mastic, but you can't seal the filter slot, but you can use temporary tape on the filter slot. Again, another redundant process to try to keep the radon out of the house. The other thing we do is we seal up air handler cabinets, again, with temporary tape. You want to be careful with this. You don't want to send a technician who doesn't know anything about furnaces and say, yeah, seal up the air handler cabinet, because he might end up sealing up something that he shouldn't seal up, like the combustion area of the furnace. In this picture, you can see the lower part of the furnace is where the flames are, and we won't want anyone taping over that. All right. So the other, again, another redundant process. Even though you have a closed crawl space, You know, you don't want air, a lot of air to move from crawl space to house, so we want to make sure that the floor is sealed up. It's normal weatherization work, but sometimes with closed crawl spaces and heated crawl spaces, people are do less work because they're, hey, it's a heated space, we don't have to worry about it. Well, we just don't want the air to mix between the crawl space and the house because it could have some of that soil gas in it, and some of the soil gas could be radon. All right, last but not least, we have some of the resources we used for this training, and as Weatherization Program Notice 17-7 from DOE, Table of Issues. We've used the Citizen's Guide to Radon. You're going to need to look up the EPA protocols for home energy upgrades. You also should look up EPA's Indoor Air Plus construction standard they were telling us how to do ground covers with that. It's probably not that, it's helpful, but not that helpful. The NREL SWS, the 2020 version, is really clear on precautionary measures. We also used a Build Radon Out and Alaska Weatherization were some of our other resources for this particular presentation. That is the end of our slideshow now, and really appreciate you taking a look. If you have any questions, you could always email us at let's see, at the BPC where we work. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.